I was recovering from a serious illness when my own son decided I was no longer worth saving. Before leaving on a 36-day luxury vacation with his wife and mother-in-law, he threw away my medication, shut off the heat, and water, took my phone, and locked me inside my own home. He was certain I would be dead before he returned. But 36 days later, the moment he opened the door, his smile vanished, and his face turned ghostly pale. I'm grateful you're here with me today, on Silent Sweet Revenge. Before we go further, drop a comment and tell me, where are you watching from? Your country, your city? I love knowing who's in this room with me. A quick note: this story contains fictional elements crafted for entertainment and reflection. Any resemblance to names or places is coincidental, but the lesson inside it is worth keeping. The winter light, coming through the floor-to-ceiling windows of my penthouse, had always been one of my favorite things about this apartment. On clear mornings, it arrived in long golden sheets, sliding across the herringbone hardwood floors and warming everything it touched. But on the morning of January 6th, the sky over Manhattan was the color of old concrete, and the light that came through the glass was thin and cold, doing nothing to cut the chill that had settled deep into my bones overnight. I had been lying awake since 4 in the morning. Not because of pain, my body had been giving me less trouble lately than I let on, but because of a feeling I could not name. A low, persistent unease that sat behind my sternum like a stone I couldn't cough loose. I had learned over 65 years of building things and watching them either stand or fall to pay attention to feelings like that. They were rarely wrong. I heard the elevator open at 9:30. Gavin's footsteps were distinctive, measured, deliberate, the walk of a man who had spent the last 3 years convincing himself he owned every room he entered. I had noticed the change in him, gradually, the way you notice a building settling, a crack here, a shift there, nothing alarming on its own. Until the morning you look up and realize the whole foundation has moved. He appeared in the doorway of my bedroom, wearing a charcoal suit I didn't recognize, a silk tie, the color of a bruise, and a cologne that cost more than my first month's rent on the Lower East Side had, back when I was 23, and drawing blueprints on a fold-out table in a studio apartment. He looked polished. He looked expensive. He looked like everything I had built him to look like, and for a moment the pride I felt was so automatic it nearly fooled me. Nearly. "Morning, Dad." His voice was easy practiced. He crossed to the window and stood with his hands in his pockets, looking out at the skyline, the way a man looks at something he is already calculating the value of. "You're dressed early," I said. My voice came out steadier than I felt. I pushed myself up against the headboard, ignoring the way my arms trembled slightly, with the effort a habit I had developed, performing weakness so naturally, I sometimes forgot it was a performance. "Okay, we've got an early car to the airport." He turned from the window and looked at me then, and something in his expression shifted a microsecond of assessment, quick and cold, before the warmth came back like a lamp being switched on. "Marna wants to get there with time to spare. You know how she is." "Hawaii," I said. "Hawaii first, then Las Vegas for the last week." He smiled, and the smile was almost right. Almost. 36 days all in. We've had this planned since October. I watched him move toward the vanity on the far wall, the long mahogany table where I kept my medications in a neat row of amber bottles, along with my reading glasses, my watch, and a framed photograph of my wife Margaret taken on the roof of the first building I ever designed. He picked up one of the bottles and turned it in his fingers, reading the label with what he intended to look like casual curiosity. My chest tightened. "Who's going to look in on me?" I asked. 36 days is a long stretch, Gavin." He set the bottle down, not back in its place, but off to the side, slightly too close to the edge. "You'll be fine, Dad. You always manage." He said it the way you say something you've rehearsed, words emptied of their meaning through repetition. Mrs. Calloway downstairs said she'd check in. Mrs. Calloway is 81 years old and has a bad hip. She had then order in. He shrugged, and the shrug was the most honest thing about him that morning, a flicker of impatience too quick to catch if you weren't looking for it, and I had been looking for it for months. You have the grocery delivery app on your phone. You have the doctor's number. You're not helpless. The words landed the way he intended them to, not as cruelty. Not exactly, but as a door being gently, firmly closed. From the hallway came the click of heels on marble, and then Marin appeared behind him, trailing a cloud of perfume and the particular energy of a woman already mentally somewhere else entirely. She was dressed for a flight, the way some people dress for a gala, cream cashmere oversized sunglasses pushed up into her hair, a carry-on bag that I knew from the logo alone had cost more than my first car. "Gavin, the car's going to be here in 20 minutes, she said, barely glancing into the bedroom. Her eyes skimmed over me the way eyes skim over furniture, registered, categorized, dismissed. "Did you grab the itinerary printouts from the office?" "I'll get them." She disappeared back down the hallway, the click of her heels fading toward the living room, and from somewhere further in the apartment came another voice, lower, rougher, with the particular carrying quality of a woman who had spent decades making herself heard across casino floors. "Gavin." Darlene Kessler's voice came from the direction of the front hall. "The driver just texted. He's outside." I had never liked Darlene Kessler. I had tried in the careful, disciplined way I approached things I found structurally unsound, looking for the load-bearing elements, the things worth preserving. I had found very few. She was a woman built entirely for extraction of attention, of resources, of whatever could be loosened from the people around her. Marin had inherited her mother's instincts without her mother's patience, which made her marginally less dangerous and considerably more expensive. Gavin moved toward the door, and I watched him with the particular attention of a man who has learned that the most important structural failures are the ones that happen slowly in the places you aren't watching. 36 days, I said again. He paused in the doorway, turned back. And for just a moment, one fraction of a second, something crossed his face that I had not seen there in a very long time. Something that might have been guilt, or might have been the shadow of it, the memory of a feeling he had outgrown. Then it was gone. "Get some rest, Dad," he said. "You look tired." He walked out. His footsteps moved back down the hall toward the voices of his wife and his mother-in-law, toward the luggage and the car, and the 36 days he had so carefully planned. I heard the low murmur of their conversation words. I couldn't make out a laugh from Marin, the rolling thunder of a large suitcase being dragged across hardwood. I lay back against the pillows. The unease behind my sternum had not loosened. If anything, it had grown heavier, more specific, taking on a shape I was only beginning to recognize. I looked at the vanity across the room. At the amber bottle, Gavin had moved, sitting too close to the edge, catching the thin January light. My hand slid slowly, quietly beneath the mattress. My fingers found it before my eyes did. The hard plastic shell of the Nokia, cool and solid beneath the mattress, exactly where I had placed it 6 months ago, when something in my gut told me to. I had never been able to explain that instinct to anyone, not even to Ronan. But I had learned over 65 years that the instincts you can't explain are usually the ones worth trusting. I pressed the device flat against the mattress and kept my hand there waiting. Gavin came back into the room 20 minutes later. He had loosened his tie slightly, and his movements had changed. The careful, practiced ease was gone, replaced by something more mechanical, more purposeful. He crossed directly to the vanity without looking at me and picked up the first amber bottle. "What are you doing?" I asked. cleaning up a little. He didn't turn around. You've got too much clutter in here, Dad. It's not good for you. He picked up the second bottle, then the third. Then he swept all 5 of them off the vanity in a single motion and dropped them into the wastebasket in the corner. The plastic containers hit the metal bin with a hollow rattling sound that seemed to echo off every hard surface in the room. The sound went through me like a current. My thumb found the number 1 key on the Nokia and pressed down, holding it. The phone was old enough that the voicemail connection was automatic, a direct line to my carrier's recording system, activated by a single long press. The microphone was small, but the room was quiet, and Gavin was not a man who bothered to lower his voice when he believed he was in control. Under New York law, I was a party to that call. Everything it captured was legal. Gavin. My voice came out low and careful. Those are my medications. He turned around then, and the face he showed me was one I had never seen on my son before. Not angry, not guilty, not even cold exactly. Just empty. Cleared of everything that might complicate what he had already decided. Your medications, he repeated almost gently. Dad, you've been taking those for 2 years. Has anything actually gotten better? That's not your decision to make. I'm trying to help you. He moved to the electrical panel on the wall beside the closet and flipped the breaker for the heating system. The soft hum of warm air through the vents died instantly, and the January cold began pressing itself back into the room like something that had only been waiting for permission. Then he crossed to the hallway, opened the utility panel, and turned the main water valve to the closed position with 2 quick rotations of his wrist. My chest was burning. Not from illness, from the particular agony of watching someone you love reveal themselves completely all at once in a way you cannot unsee. He came back to the bedside and picked up my iPhone from the nightstand, slipped it into his jacket pocket without a word. Then he took out his own phone, opened the smart lock application, and changed the door code. I heard the electronic confirmation tone from the front of the apartment, a small, cheerful sound that meant I was now locked inside my own home. He leaned down, then close enough that I could smell that expensive cologne, and his voice dropped to something almost conversational. By the time we get back, he said, this place will be mine anyway. Rest up, old man. He straightened, walked to the door, paused with his hand on the frame and looked back at me one last time, and I searched his face for something. Anything, some thread of the boy I had carried on my shoulders through Central Park when he was 4 years old. Some remnant of the young man who had cried at his mother's funeral and held my hand the whole drive home. There was nothing there. Just the empty face, and then the door, and then the sound of his footsteps moving away down the hall. A minute later, every light in the penthouse went out. The cold came fast after that. Manhattan in January does not wait for an invitation. I lay in the dark, my hand still pressed against the Nokia beneath the mattress, and I let myself feel the full weight of what had just happened. The pain was extraordinary. The kind that doesn't announce itself loudly but settles in beneath everything in the place where love used to be and makes its home there. Then I took a breath, and I began to think. The darkness in the penthouse was total. Not the soft, navigable dark of a bedroom at night, the kind with the glow of a charging cable or the thin line of light beneath a door. This was the dark of a place that had been deliberately emptied of warmth and light and sound, and it pressed against me from every direction, like something with weight and intention. The cold was already working its way through the sheets. I pulled the Nokia out from under the mattress and held it above my chest. When I pressed the power button, the monochrome screen lit up small and pale and absolutely beautiful. I had not felt relief that physical in a very long time. My eyes burned with it, and I pressed my lips together hard to keep them from trembling. I checked the voicemail first. The recording was there. 41 seconds. Gavin's voice came through the tiny speaker with perfect clarity. By the time we get back, this place will be mine anyway. Rest up, old man. The timestamp read 7:52 p.m., January 6th. I listened to it twice, then saved it, with the kind of careful deliberateness I used to apply to load-bearing calculations, making sure nothing was left to chance. Then I let myself think about what I was actually holding. 6 months ago, I had sat across a desk from Dr. Caldwell, a private cardiologist on East 73rd Street. Old-school cash-only patient files kept offline in locked cabinets, the way doctors used to do things, before everything went to the cloud. He had shown me the post-operative scans and told me the repair had taken. Clean. Complete. My heart, the one that had been quietly failing for 2 years, was functioning better than it had in a decade. I had told no one. Not Ronan. Not Mitchell. Not Gavin. Because I had needed to know something that no amount of asking would ever tell me. I had needed to see what my son would do when he believed I was still fragile. When he thought the timeline was still running in his favor. The bottles on the vanity were vitamin D and fish oil. Nothing more. Gavin had thrown away supplements and convinced himself he had committed a masterpiece of planning. The things we believe because we need to. Now the why of what he had done settled into me fully, and the pain of it was the deep structural kind, the kind that doesn't heal cleanly, but changes the shape of everything around it. I had handed him the company. I had stepped back so he could step forward. I had loved him in the only way I knew how to love things, by building them, by investing in them, by giving them everything I had and trusting they would hold. He had looked at all of that and seen an obstacle. I pressed and held the number 2 key on the Nokia. Ronan Ashcombe's number had lived in that speed dial slot for 22 years. He had been my closest friend since we were both young men scrambling for contracts in the same city, competing and collaborating in roughly equal measure until our industries diverged, mine into development, his into private security. He had built one of the most respected firms in the Northeast before selling it and retiring to a townhouse in Brooklyn Heights, where he claimed to be resting and was by all accounts completely incapable of it. He picked up on the second ring. Preston. His voice was alert in the way of a man who has spent decades training himself to be alert when the phone rings after dark. Talk to me. I need you, I said. My voice cracked on the second word just slightly, and I was grateful for the darkness that meant no one could see my face. Gavin locked me in. Heat's off. Water's off. He took my phone. I've got the Nokia. A pause, not hesitation, but the pause of a man rapidly reorganizing his priorities. Then, are you hurt? Cold? Tired? Not hurt. The door code. Changed. He used the app. I have a team that can be there in 40 minutes, Ronan said, and his voice had shifted into something I recognized from decades of friendship, the particular calm of a man who has decided what needs to happen and is already making it happen. I'm coming with them. Don't hang up. Ronan. I stopped him before he could put the phone down. Don't call the police yet. Don't warn Gavin. Don't do anything that lets him know I'm alive and talking. I paused, gathering the thought that had been forming since the moment I lay back in the dark. I want 36 days. Let him fly. Let him spend whatever he's going to spend. I want him to come back on his own schedule, on his own 2 feet, and walk straight into whatever we've built for him by then. The line was quiet for 3 seconds. You planned for this? Ronan said. It wasn't a question. I planned for the possibility, I said. I hoped I was wrong. I'll be there in 40 minutes, he said. Keep the line open. I set the phone on the pillow beside my head and stared up at the ceiling I couldn't see, listening to the faint sounds of Ronan moving through his house, the jingle of keys, a door, the particular echo of a man descending stairs quickly. Outside, 30 floors below, Manhattan went on doing what Manhattan always does, indifferent and relentless, full of people who had no idea what was happening in this apartment. The cold had reached my feet now, but the stone behind my sternum, the one that had been sitting there since 4 in the morning, had finally, after a very long day, begun to feel like something other than dread. It felt like the beginning of a plan. I heard them before I saw them. The elevator opened with a soft chime, then came the controlled thunder of boots moving fast across hardwood, the sharp mechanical whine of equipment being readied, and Ronan's voice cutting through all of it with the quiet authority of a man who had spent 30 years directing people in high-pressure situations and had never once needed to raise his voice to do it. "Southeast corner bedroom," he said. "Go." The door came open with a single hard impact, not kicked, but forced at the frame with something flat and deliberate, the kind of technique that gets a door open fast without destroying it entirely. Light flooded in from tactical flashlights sweeping across the ceiling and walls, and I raised one hand to shield my eyes from the sudden brightness. Preston. Ronan was across the room in 4 strides, dropping to one knee beside the bed, one large hand gripping my forearm with a firmness that was equal parts assessment and reassurance. His face, lit from below by the flashlights, was pale beneath its usual color, jaw set so tight I could see the muscle working in his cheek. "Talk to me. Where are you hurting?" "I'm not hurting," I said. "I'm cold and I'm angry, and I want a cup of coffee." Something moved through his expression. Relief fierce and unguarded there and then gone. He exhaled through his nose. "You absolute stubborn old man," he said, and his voice was rougher than usual in a way he would have denied if I'd pointed it out. "Help me sit up." He did carefully, one arm behind my shoulders. 2 of his team members, both large, both moving with the economical precision of people who trained for exactly this kind of situation, were already working through the apartment, restoring power at the electrical panel, turning the water valve back open, assessing the space with the methodical thoroughness of professionals. The heat came back on with a hum that felt in that moment like the kindest sound I had ever heard. Ronan sat on the edge of the bed and looked at me with the kind of directness that had always been one of the things I valued most about him. We had known each other long enough that he didn't bother with the questions that didn't matter. "How bad was it?" he asked. "Bad enough," I said. "Cold came in fast. Maybe 3 hours before you arrived." I paused. "I've been in worse. Not recently, but I've been in worse." The voicemail. It's got 41 seconds. Clear as a phone call. I held up the Nokia. Timestamp his voice, his exact words. "Mitchell needs to hear it tonight." Ronan nodded slowly. "I'll call him on the way to the hospital." "I'm not going to a hospital." He looked at me. "I'm going to a private room where a doctor I trust can confirm I'm not dying." I said, "and then I'm going to spend the next 34 days making sure that when Gavin comes home, there is nothing left for him to come home to except consequences." I met his eyes. "Can you arrange that?" "I already have a doctor on call," Ronan said. "Dr. Reeves. Private clinic on the Upper East Side, full facility, completely off the public record." He stood straightening his jacket with the practiced motion of a man returning to operational mode. "We move in 10 minutes. Can you walk?" "I can walk." I could. Slowly, and with one hand on Ronan's arm for the first 20 steps. But I could walk. We moved through the penthouse, my penthouse, the one I had purchased with the proceeds from my third major development deal, the one I had lived in for 19 years, and I looked at it as we passed through. The dark kitchen, the living room with its floor-to-ceiling views of a city that had no idea what had happened here tonight. The front hall where Gavin's luggage had stood just hours ago, leaving faint impressions in the runner rug. I felt the loss of it briefly and acutely, like a clean cut. Then I let it go. There would be time for grief later. Right now there was work to do. The private clinic smelled of antiseptic and fresh linen. Dr. Reeves, 50s, efficient, the kind of doctor who speaks to patients like adults, confirmed what I already knew: mild hypothermia, early stage, nothing that warmth and fluids wouldn't resolve within a few hours. He ordered an IV and told me to sleep if I could. I could not sleep. I lay in the clean white bed with the IV in my arm and the Nokia on the nightstand, and worked through the architecture of what came next. The way I had always worked through the architecture of difficult projects, starting with the foundation, building up. Ronan sat in the chair by the window, phone to his ear, speaking in the low, rapid shorthand of a man coordinating multiple moving parts simultaneously. It was nearly 4 in the morning when the door opened and Mitchell Farrow walked in. Mitchell was 56 years old, had been my attorney for 22 years, and had the distinction of being the only person I had ever met who looked more alert at 4 in the morning than he did at noon. He was carrying a leather briefcase and wearing a suit that suggested he had not been home when Ronan called him, which meant he had been working, which was entirely consistent with everything I knew about him. He set the briefcase on the foot of the bed, looked at me with an expression that managed to convey both relief and professional assessment simultaneously, and said, "Tell me everything. Start from when he walked into the room." I told him everything. When I finished, Mitchell opened the briefcase, removed a legal pad, and uncapped a pen. "All right," he said. "Here's what we're going to do." Mitchell worked the way he always worked, methodically, without drama, moving through problems the way a surgeon moves through tissue, cutting only what needed to be cut, and leaving everything else exactly where it was. He listened to the voicemail twice with the Nokia held close to his ear, his expression unchanged throughout. When it finished the second time, he set the phone on the bedside table and made a note on his legal pad. "Timestamp is clean," he said. 41 seconds, his voice, his words, "your carrier's system. Under New York Penal Law, Section 250, you were a party to that call, you initiated the connection. The recording is legal and admissible." He looked up. "This is the most important piece of evidence you have. I want a copy preserved with a third-party digital forensics firm before the end of today." "Do it," I said. "I will." He turned the page. Now, the power of attorney. 3 years ago, on the advice of my estate attorney, a different firm, one that handled only personal matters, I had executed a durable power of attorney, naming Mitchell as my legal representative for all financial and business decisions. The document had been notarized, witnessed, and filed. It meant that Mitchell could walk into any bank in New York and act on my behalf with the same authority I had, without a court order, without Gavin's knowledge, without anyone's permission but mine. I had prepared it as a precaution. I had hoped never to use it. Under the durable power of attorney, Mitchell said, "I can appear at your primary bank this morning and revoke Gavin's access to every corporate account and supplementary card connected to your business holdings. The bank is required to comply. This does not require Gavin's consent and does not trigger any notification to him directly. He'll only discover it when a card is declined." I thought of Gavin at the airport right now, probably in the first-class lounge, probably ordering something expensive, entirely confident that the machine I had built was still running for his benefit. "How soon?" I asked. I'll be at the bank when it opens at 9, Mitchell said. By 10 o'clock, every card with his name on it will be inactive. Ronan from his chair by the window made a sound that was almost a laugh. Almost. There's one more thing, Mitchell said. He reached into the briefcase and removed a second document, a single sheet already prepared, which told me he had anticipated this conversation even before I called him. Gavin's office computer. The company issued it, which means it belongs to the company, which means it belongs to you. Under standard corporate policy, employees have no reasonable expectation of privacy on company-owned equipment. He slid the sheet across the blanket toward me. I need your authorization for the IT department to access and preserve all data on that device before the end of business today. I read the document. Signed it. Mitchell was already dialing his phone before the pen left the page. What his IT contact found on Gavin's company computer 2 hours later would have knocked me sideways if I had not already spent the night recalibrating every assumption I had ever made about my son. As it was, it landed like confirmation of something I had already on some deep and reluctant level known. Mitchell read it to me over the phone, his voice as level as if he were reading a weather report. Darlene Kessler 2 weeks before the trip. Throw out the old man's pills and lock the door. 36 days and you come home to everything. I need that money, Gavin. The Vegas people aren't patient. Gavin responding within 4 minutes, already done. He won't last a week. I lay very still after Mitchell finished reading. The IV drip continued its quiet work. Outside the clinic window, Manhattan was fully awake now. Horns, sirens, the percussion of 8 million people going about their morning, and I listened to it for a long moment, because it was easier than speaking. Then I said, Las Vegas people. Gambling debts, Mitchell said. My guess is significant ones. I'll have a full picture by tomorrow. So that was the shape of it. Darlene Kessler, drowning in debt she had accumulated at casino tables in Las Vegas, had looked at her daughter's marriage to the son of a wealthy man and seen a solution. She had planted the idea, watered it, and watched it grow until Gavin believed it was his own. And Gavin, my son, the boy I had carried on my shoulders through Central Park, had decided that agreeing was easier than being decent. Mitchell, I said. One more thing. The will, he said before I could finish. The will. He was already writing. I'll have a revised draft to you by end of day. Gavin's name removed, replaced by the charitable foundation you've been meaning to establish. He paused. It's the right call, Preston. I want you to know I think that. It was the most personal thing Mitchell had said to me in 22 years of working together. I appreciated it more than I knew how to say, so I didn't try. 36 days, I said instead. I want everything locked down and ready before he lands back at JFK. It will be, Mitchell said, and closed his legal pad with the quiet certainty of a man who has never missed a deadline in his professional life. Ronan walked him to the door. I lay back against the pillow and looked at the ceiling and let myself feel fully and without flinching the particular weight of what it meant to spend a morning legally dismantling the future you had spent decades building for your only child. It was the hardest thing I had ever signed my name to, and I did not hesitate for a single second. Before I go on, I need to know you're still with me. Drop the number 36 in the comments right now. That's all. Just 36. Because what happens next, what Gavin does with that credit card, is something I don't think you'll see coming. A gentle reminder, this story contains fictional elements woven in for storytelling purposes. If that's not something you'd like to continue with, this is a good place to step away. No hard feelings. The first report came in at 11:47 on the morning of January 7th. Ronan had placed one of his former associates, a quiet, methodical man named Hess, who had spent 15 years doing financial surveillance work on the task of monitoring Gavin's personal accounts. Not the corporate accounts which Mitchell had already sealed shut. Gavin's own accounts. The ones he had built up over 3 years of drawing a CEO salary from my company, a salary I had set generously, because I had believed at the time that generosity was a language a father and son could speak to each other. Ronan read me the report over the phone, while I sat up in the clinic bed eating the breakfast Dr. Reeves had insisted on: scrambled eggs, wheat toast, orange juice, nothing exciting. First transaction at 11:30 local time in Honolulu, Ronan said. Restaurant charge $412. Lunch, I said. Very early lunch? Or very late breakfast at a place with a view of the water and a prix-fixe menu? I heard him exhale. He used his personal visa, not the corporate card. I set down my fork. He tried the corporate card first. That's my read. The gap between when they would have arrived at the restaurant and when the charge actually hit suggests he tried one card, it failed, and he switched. Ronan paused. He didn't tell them. Maren and Darlene, there's no indication he said a word about the corporate card being declined. He just paid and moved on. I thought about that for a moment, about the particular pride of a man who would rather drain his own savings account than admit to his wife and mother-in-law that something had gone wrong. I had built that pride in him, in some ways had modeled it myself for decades, the refusal to show weakness in front of people who might use it against you. I had not intended for him to weaponize it against himself quite so efficiently. How much does he have in personal savings? I asked. Hess estimates between $170,000 and $190,000, based on salary history and spending patterns over the last 3 years. And 36 days in Hawaii and Las Vegas. With Maren and Darlene, Ronan added, and the way he said it conveyed everything that needed to be conveyed about the spending habits of those two women when someone else appeared to be paying. The days that followed had a strange, suspended quality. I was moved from the clinic to a private room in a residential medical facility on the Upper East Side, the kind of place that looks from the outside like a very expensive apartment building and functions on the inside as a discreet recovery environment for people who require medical attention without the visibility of a hospital. My hypothermia resolved within 48 hours. My actual heart, the repaired, fully functional one that Gavin had never known about, gave me no trouble whatsoever. I slept. I ate. I walked the length of the corridor and back twice a day, watching the January light change over the East River through the window at the end of the hall. And every evening, Ronan came with the daily report. Day 4. Gavin's personal card, $11,000 at a resort in Maui. They had apparently decided Honolulu wasn't enough and taken a commuter flight to the next island. Maren had discovered a spa that she found particularly agreeable. Day 8. $6,000 at a private charter boat company. Apparently Hawaii's coastline required personal inspection. Day 10. Ronan set the report on my dinner tray and pointed at one line without a word. $45,000 total spent in 10 days. He thinks I'm dead, I said. It was not a question. He thinks you're dying, Ronan said. Or dead. Either way, he thinks the clock has already run out. He pulled up a chair, turned it backward, and sat on it the way he had been sitting on chairs since we were young men who couldn't afford furniture with backs. He's spending like a man who's already inherited, like the math is already settled. I looked at the number on the report. $45,000 in 10 days. Spent on a trip funded by the salary I had paid him from the company I had built, on the assumption that he would one day be worthy of running it. The pain of it moved through me in a long, slow wave, not sharp, not sudden, but the kind that covers everything the way a tide covers a beach. reaching all the places you thought were safely above the waterline. Then it receded the way tides do. Day 15 report, I said. What's the number? Ronan checked his phone. $91,420, I nodded. 21 days left. He has between 80 and 100,000 remaining. I calculated the trajectory in my head, the way I had always calculated trajectories in projects and markets, and the long arcs of things that take years to resolve. He's going to run out in Las Vegas. That's my read too, Ronan said. Good, I said. And I meant it in the way you mean things when the grief has moved all the way through you and come out the other side as something harder and more useful. Let him get there. Let him stand in the lobby of whatever hotel he's booked and feel the card decline in his hand. I looked at Ronan. I want him to understand before he comes home that the version of his life he thought he was inheriting does not exist. I want that to be clear to him before he ever opens my door. Ronan studied me for a long moment with the particular attention of a man who has known you long enough to see past what you're saying to what it's costing you to say it. You doing okay? He asked. Quietly. Just the two of us in the room. My eyes burned unexpectedly suddenly, and without much warning the way they sometimes did when someone asked the right question at the right moment. I pressed my lips together and looked at the window. Ask me in 36 days, I said. While Gavin was somewhere over the Pacific spending money, he was increasingly pretending was already his. I was doing something considerably less dramatic, lying in a recovery bed, staring at the ceiling and thinking about the past. There is a particular kind of thinking that only happens when your body has been forcibly slowed down. Not planning, not problem solving, just the long, unguarded kind of remembering that surfaces when you stop moving fast enough to outrun it. I had spent most of my adult life moving too fast to do much of it. The clinic on the Upper East Side with its quiet corridors and its polite staff and its view of a gray January river had removed that option entirely. So I remembered. I remembered being 23 years old in a studio apartment on Delancey Street, drawing building plans on a drafting table I had carried up 4 flights of stairs by myself because I couldn't afford a moving company and was too proud to ask for help. I remembered the particular smell of that apartment old radiator heat coffee and the faint chemical bite of drafting pencils, and how it had seemed at the time like the smell of a future being built one careful line at a time. I remembered the morning I won my first major contract. A mixed-use development in the Bronx, nothing glamorous but mine. I had called my mother from a payphone outside the developer's office. This was 1981. Payphones were still a reasonable way to communicate, and she had cried, and I had stood on the sidewalk with the receiver pressed to my ear and felt something I had no name for at the time. Something that felt like the ground becoming solid beneath my feet for the first time. I remembered Margaret. Margaret had come into my life in the way the best things do, sideways through a door I hadn't been looking at. We met at a city planning meeting in '84, both of us arguing opposite sides of a zoning dispute, and she had dismantled my position so efficiently and with such cheerful precision that I had asked her to dinner purely out of admiration. We were married 11 months later. She was the only person I had ever met who could look at a building I had designed and tell me immediately and accurately what was wrong with it, and then tell me with equal accuracy what was right with it. I had never been able to explain to anyone who asked why that combination of qualities had felt like coming home. She died 9 years ago. Pancreatic cancer, fast and merciless the way that particular disease tends to be. I had held her hand in a hospital room that smelled of antiseptic and winter, and she had looked at me with the particular clarity that comes to people near the end, and she had said, "Preston, Gavin has your ambition, but watch him. Make sure he also has your conscience." I had told her not to worry, lying in the recovery bed 16 days into January. I thought about that conversation and felt the full weight of how badly I had failed her. I had given Gavin everything. The education, the opportunity, the salary, the title, the skyline view from the corner office. I had handed him the company the way you hand someone a gift. You spent years choosing carefully, with love, with the absolute belief that the recipient understood what it cost. And somewhere in the years between the handover and this January night, something had shifted in him in a way I had not seen clearly enough, or had not wanted to see clearly enough, which amounted to the same failure. Darlene Kessler had not created what was in Gavin. She had only found it and given it a direction. That was the part that hurt the most. Not that he had been manipulated, but that there had been something in him willing to be manipulated in this particular way. That when she had whispered the idea into his ear 36 days, and you come home to everything, some part of him had recognized it, not as a suggestion, but as a permission. I pressed my palms flat against the mattress and breathed through it. By day 20, I could walk the full length of the corridor without stopping. By day 25, I was eating full meals and sleeping without interruption, and feeling in the specific physical sense better than I had felt in 2 years. Dr. Reeves came by every other morning, checked my vitals, reviewed my blood work, and each time delivered the same verdict with the same quiet satisfaction. "Everything's where it should be, Mr. Halbrook." Where it should be. I thought about that phrase a great deal during those weeks. About what it meant for things to be where they should be. About the version of my life in which Gavin had come into my room on January 6th and sat on the edge of the bed and said, "Dad, we need to talk about your care while we're away." And we had worked it out together the way fathers and sons are supposed to work things out. About how easily that version could have existed. On the morning of day 26, Mitchell called. "Preston." His voice had the particular quality it got when he was delivering information he considered significant. Gavin just crossed $120,000 on his personal card. And according to Hess, he booked 4 nights at the Bellagio in Las Vegas, starting February 2nd. I sat up straighter in the bed. "He has between 50 and 70,000 left," Mitchell continued. 4 nights at the Bellagio with Marin and Darlene will run him 30 to 40,000 minimum. That leaves him 20 to 30 for the remaining days. A pause. "He's not going to make it to day 36 with anything in his account." Outside my window, the East River was the color of hammered pewter under a low February sky. "Good," I said. "Let him find out in the lobby." Ronan got the alert at 3:47 in the afternoon on February 4th. He was sitting in the chair by my window he had taken to spending his afternoons at the clinic, ostensibly to keep me company actually, because he was constitutionally incapable of staying away from an operation in progress when his phone buzzed on the side table. He picked it up, read the screen, and a slow smile spread across his face. Not a happy smile exactly. The kind of smile that arrives when something you predicted comes true in precisely the way you predicted it. And the satisfaction of being right is complicated by the knowledge of what it cost to be right. "Bellagio front desk," he said. Card declined. I set down the book I had been pretending to read for the last 40 minutes. "Which card?" "Personal Visa. The last one he had." Ronan turned the phone so I could see the transaction log. Hess had been maintaining a clean column of numbers that told the story of 30 days more efficiently than any narrative could. The final entry read, "Attempted charge Bellagio Hotel and Casino Las Vegas NV declined. Account balance negative position. Negative position." I looked at that phrase for a long moment. Gavin had arrived in Las Vegas with approximately $60,000 remaining. The Bellagio suite, 4 nights, the kind of room Marin would have insisted on, with the fountain view and the marble bathroom and the thread count that required a separate line item, had apparently consumed most of that in a single transaction attempt, and the bank had simply and quietly said no. I thought about what that moment looked like from the inside. The lobby of the Bellagio is one of the great theatrical spaces in the American West. Vaulted ceilings hung with Dale Chihuly's glass flowers, the perpetual cool of recycled desert air, the particular hush of a place where enormous amounts of money change hands so constantly that the movement of it becomes almost imperceptible, like weather. Gavin would have been standing at the front desk in whatever he had worn on the flight from Honolulu, Marin beside him, with her hand on the handle of a carry-on that cost more than a semester of college, Darlene somewhere behind them, with the particular impatience of a woman who considers waiting in lines a personal affront. And the desk clerk would have looked at the screen, looked up at Gavin and said the words, "I'm sorry, sir. This card isn't going through." Ronan's phone buzzed again. He read the new alert and his expression shifted, the complicated smile becoming something sharper. "He tried a second card," Ronan said. "Different account savings. Also declined. Hess says he drained it 2 days ago in Hawaii, a charter flight to Molokai apparently. Marin wanted to see the sea cliffs of Molokai. Chartered." I pressed 2 fingers to the bridge of my nose and breathed slowly through it, because the alternative was to laugh, and laughing felt wrong given everything, and yet the absurdity of it was almost more than I could absorb. My son had spent his own inheritance trying to live like a man who had already received it, and the bill had come due in the lobby of a Las Vegas hotel while his wife wanted to see sea cliffs, and his mother-in-law waited impatiently behind him. Margaret would have had something precise and accurate to say about all of this. I wished, not for the first time and not for the last, that she were here to say it. Ronan's phone buzzed a 3rd time. He read it, set the phone face down on the side table, and looked at me with the directness of a man who knows that the next piece of information he delivers is going to land hard and wants to give it the proper weight. "S'occupe-t-il?" "The hotel manager asked them to step aside," he said. "They're holding the reservation pending alternative payment. Marin's card, her personal one, has a limit of 8,000. It won't cover 4 nights plus incidentals." He paused. "Darlene attempted to use a card as well. Declined on the first try. Hess says it's been overdrawn for at least 6 months. Of course it had, and of course she had come to Las Vegas anyway." Darlene Kessler's creditors and the Bellagio ran in entirely different circles, and I suspected she had told herself the inheritance would arrive before anyone came looking. People who owe money have a remarkable capacity for believing the next thing will fix it. "Where are they now?" I asked. Hess lost visual after they left the lobby. Best guess is they're on the strip working out what to do next." Ronan leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "Preston. He has no corporate cards. Both personal accounts are empty or negative. Marin's card covers maybe a budget hotel for a couple of nights, nothing more. They are for all practical purposes stranded in Las Vegas with designer luggage and no money." The room was quiet for a moment. Outside, the East River moved steadily southward, as it always did, indifferent to the particular human drama playing out in this building and every other building along its banks. "How many days until day 36? I asked. 6, Ronan said. I nodded slowly. 6 days. Gavin would spend them the way people spend days when the story they have been telling themselves has finally, publicly, catastrophically failed. Scrambling for a version of events that still made sense, looking for some angle he had missed, some resource he had forgotten to account for. And finding none. Because there were none. Because I had made sure of it. "He'll try to sell something," I said. "The watch. Whatever jewelry Marin brought. Already tracking the major pawn shops on Fremont Street, Ronan said. Hess has contacts. I looked at my old friend, this man who had known me for 40 years, who had broken down my door in the middle of a January night without asking a single unnecessary question, who was now spending his retirement coordinating financial surveillance operations from a chair in my recovery room, and felt something move through my chest that had nothing to do with my heart and everything to do with the particular luck of a life that had, despite everything, contained people worth trusting. Thank you, I said, for all of this. Ronan waved a hand as if swatting the words away. Don't get sentimental on me, Preston. We've still got 6 days and a courtroom to get through. He picked up his phone again. I'll have Hess send the moment anything moves on Fremont Street. He was already dialing before he finished the sentence. Hess sent the alert at 2:19 in the afternoon on February 5th. Subject and companions entered Gold and Silver Pawn Shop, 7113 South Las Vegas Boulevard. Duration 41 minutes. Exited with cash envelope. Estimated transaction value based on comparable sales $1,200 to $1,600. Ronan read it aloud to me without commentary. He didn't need to add any. The Gold and Silver Pawn Shop on Las Vegas Boulevard was one of the most well-known pawn operations in the country. The kind of place that had been filmed for television, that tourists sometimes visited as an attraction, that had a line out the door on weekends. It was not the kind of place a man went when things were going well. I thought about Gavin walking through that door. I had bought him the Rolex for his 35th birthday. A Submariner steel and gold, the kind of watch that announces a certain kind of arrival without being vulgar about it. I had had it engraved on the back GH Keep building. It had seemed at the time like the right thing to say. A continuation of something. A passing of something from one set of hands to another. The pawn shop owner would have looked at it through a loop, checked the serial number, noted the absence of the original box and purchase documentation, and named a price that had nothing to do with what the watch was worth, and everything to do with what Gavin's face looked like when he set it on the counter. Desperate people get desperate prices. That is one of the oldest laws in commerce, and it is entirely without mercy. How much did they get? I asked. Hess estimates $1,500 give or take. The Rolex, 2 of Marin's bags a Chanel, and what Hess's contact described as a large tan tote, probably Goyard, and a pair of earrings. Ronan paused. No boxes, no authenticity cards, no receipts. The shop took them at roughly 8 to 10% of retail. 8 to 10%. I had paid $11,000 for that watch. Marin's bags, if I remembered correctly from the credit card statements Mitchell had shown me, had cost somewhere in the range of $14,000 combined. $25,000 in retail value converted to $1,500 in cash, because they had walked into a pawn shop on a Tuesday afternoon with nowhere else to go. The numbers were not the point. I knew that. But they had a particular clarity to them that I found in a grim way useful. They made concrete what had until now been mostly abstract, the distance between the life Gavin had believed he was about to inherit and the life he was actually living. Where are they staying? I asked. Motel on East Fremont, Ronan said. Hess drove past it this morning. It's... He stopped, chose his next word carefully. Modest. How modest? The kind of modest that has a vending machine in the parking lot and a sign that advertises weekly rates. He set the phone down. Marin posted something on Instagram this morning and then deleted it within 4 minutes, but Hess caught a screenshot. She looked... He paused again. She looked like someone who had not slept well. I did not feel satisfaction at that. I want to be precise about this, because it would be easy to say that I did, and it would make a certain kind of story. But what I actually felt was something more complicated and considerably less comfortable, a heaviness that had nothing to do with triumph and everything to do with the specific grief of watching something you built go wrong in ways you can no longer stop, only witness. Gavin called me that afternoon. Or rather, he called my old number, the iPhone he had taken from my nightstand, on January 6th, which Mitchell had reported to the carrier as stolen and had remotely wiped within 48 hours of the incident. The call went nowhere. I only knew about it because the carrier log showed an attempted connection flagged by Mitchell's contact at the phone company. He tried twice, 3 minutes apart. I sat with that information for a long time, turning it over, trying to understand what it meant that he had picked up a phone in a budget motel in Las Vegas and dialed his father's number. Whether it was calculation checking whether I was still alive, still reachable, still potentially useful, or whether it was something else, something older and less strategic. The muscle memory of a person in trouble reaching for the number they have always reached for, I would probably never know, and I had made my peace with not knowing. What I did know was what he had said to Darlene 2 weeks before the trip. He won't last a week. 5 more days, I said. Ronan nodded. Hess says they bought bus tickets this morning, Greyhound Las Vegas to New York, departing February 9th. Arrive February 10th. He looked at me. They're not flying back. Of course they weren't. $1,500 does not cover 3 Greyhound tickets from Las Vegas to New York and leave much for anything else. But it covers the tickets themselves barely, and that was apparently what they had. Gavin Halbrook, CEO of Halbrook Development Group, was taking a Greyhound bus across the country because he had spent $180,000 of his own money celebrating an inheritance he had not received. February 10th. I said. That's day 35. Close enough to 36, Ronan said. They'll be back in the city by evening, in the building by He checked his watch. Call it 7 or 8 p.m., assuming the bus runs on time. I thought about the penthouse, the clean floors, the working heat, the view of the Manhattan skyline that I had woken up to for 19 years. I thought about the chair I had chosen, and the suit I had pressed, and the tea I intended to have waiting. Then we'll be ready, I said. Dr. Reeves signed my discharge papers on the morning of February 6th, with the satisfied efficiency of a man whose patient had cooperated fully with treatment and was leaving in considerably better condition than he had arrived. His blood pressure is excellent, he said, reviewing the final chart one last time at the foot of my bed. Cardiac function is optimal, better than optimal, frankly, for a man your age. Whatever Dr. Caldwell did 6 months ago, it held. He looked up. You're in good shape, Mr. Halbrook. Better than you've been in years, I'd wager. I feel it, I said. And I meant it. 30 days of enforced rest, regular meals, and the particular clarity that comes from having your priorities arranged for you by circumstance had done something useful to my body and my mind both. I felt sharp, focused. The way I used to feel in the early days when everything was still being built and every decision felt like it mattered. Ronan drove me back to Tribeca himself. The penthouse had been professionally cleaned and restored. While I was in the clinic, Ronan's doing arranged, without being asked, executed without being mentioned. Until I walked through the front door and noticed that the wastebasket at the corner of my bedroom was gone and had been replaced with a new one. Small detail. He hadn't wanted me to see it and remember. The apartment smelled of cedar and fresh linen, and faintly of the particular quality of winter light that comes through south-facing windows on clear February mornings. I stood in the doorway of the master bedroom for a moment, and took it in the space that had been a freezing, powerless trap 5 weeks ago, restored now to exactly what it had always been. Mine. Mitchell's on his way, Ronan said from behind me. Final documents. Should take about an hour. Mitchell arrived at noon with the same leather briefcase, the same uncapped pen, and the same expression of focused calm that he brought to every meeting, regardless of what was on the agenda. We sat at the dining table, the long mahogany one I had bought at an estate sale in Connecticut. In 2003, the one Margaret had said was too big for two people, and then proceeded to fill with dinner parties every month for the next decade, and went through the papers one by one. The formal termination of Gavin's employment as CEO of Halbrook Development Group, effective immediately signed and notarized. The revocation of every proxy, every signatory authority, every delegation of power that I had granted him over the past 3 years. A board resolution properly executed, recording the transfer of all operational authority back to me as majority shareholder. This is clean, Mitchell said, closing the folder. Everything filed with the Secretary of State's office this morning. As of today, Gavin has no legal standing in this company. He cannot sign a contract, access an account, or represent the firm in any capacity. He paused. If he attempts to do any of those things, he's committing fraud. He won't know that until he tries, I said. No, Mitchell agreed. He won't. I signed the last page and set the pen down and sat for a moment with my hands flat on the table, feeling the weight of what I had just done. Not regretting it, I had moved past regret somewhere around day 15 when the daily reports from Hess had made the full picture impossible to misread. But feeling it, acknowledging it, the particular heaviness of closing a door you had spent years holding open. Mitchell left at 2. Ronan stayed. We spent the afternoon doing something I had not done in a very long time, nothing in particular. Ronan made coffee in my kitchen badly, the way he had always made coffee, and we drank it standing at the kitchen counter, looking out at the city and talking about things that had nothing to do with Gavin or lawyers or the events of the past 5 weeks. Old projects, mutual friends, a building on the west side that I had designed 30 years ago, and that was apparently being considered for a historic preservation designation, which Ronan found funnier than I did. It was, I realized, the most normal 2 hours I had experienced since January 6th. At 4 o'clock, I went to the bedroom and opened the closet. The navy suit hung where it always hung, between the gray wool and the charcoal pinstripe, pressed and ready. I had bought it for the opening of my first major Manhattan development, a mixed-use tower in Midtown that had taken 4 years and every resource I had to build, and that had, on the day it opened, made me feel like the city had finally acknowledged my right to be in it. I had worn it on significant days ever since. Openings, signings, Margaret's funeral, because she had once told me she liked how I looked in it, and I had needed that day to wear something she approved of. I put it on slowly, taking the time to get it right. Checked the mirror, straightened the lapels, found the pocket square Margaret had given me. Cream silk, monogrammed, and folded it into the breast pocket the way she had taught me. Then I went to the kitchen, put the kettle on, and made a pot of tea. Ronan appeared in the kitchen doorway, looked at me standing at the counter in the navy suit with the tea steeping, and said nothing for a moment. Then he said, "You look like a man who's been planning this for a while." 36 days, I said. How long does it take a Greyhound to get from Las Vegas to New York? About 40 hours, I said. Give or take. They left yesterday evening. They'll be in the city by tonight, tomorrow morning at the latest. I poured the tea into the good cup, the bone china one Margaret had bought in London, white with a thin gold rim. Ronan, I need you to make sure your team is in position by 6 o'clock. They've been in position since this morning, he said. I carried the tea to the living room and sat down in the chair I had chosen, facing the front door, centered on the room, positioned so that whoever walked through that entrance would see me the moment the door opened. The afternoon light was coming through the west windows, now long and golden, the kind of light that makes even ordinary spaces look like something worth keeping. I sat. I drank my tea. I waited. Outside, somewhere on a highway in the American interior, a Greyhound bus was moving steadily eastward through the February dark. Stop right here for just a moment. If you've been with me this whole time, drop "open the door" in the comments. I want to know who's still here before I reveal what Gavin found when he came home on day 36, because this is the moment the entire story has been building toward. A quick note. Some elements here are fictional, shaped for storytelling. If you'd rather not continue, this is your moment to choose. But if you're staying, what comes next is worth every second. They arrived at 7:43 in the evening. I knew the exact time because Ronan's man in the lobby sent a 2-word text, "They're here," and I checked my watch out of habit, the way I have always checked my watch when something significant is about to begin. 7:43. 36 days and approximately 18 hours since Gavin had walked out of this apartment and turned off every light. I set my teacup down on the glass coffee table and did not move. From my chair in the center of the living room, I could hear the elevator when it opened on this floor, a soft chime followed by the mechanical sigh of the doors parting. Then came the sounds I had been listening for, the ones I had constructed in my imagination. Over 36 days of hospital beds and legal documents and daily reports from Hess. The heavy, rolling thunder of multiple large suitcases on marble. The particular exhausted irritability of people who have been traveling for 40 hours on a bus and are running entirely on the fumes of a delusion they are not yet ready to abandon. Darlene's voice came first, carrying the way it always carried, designed to cut through ambient noise and the patience of everyone within range. "Tell me the code is right this time, Gavin. My feet are absolutely destroyed, and I need to sit down." "I know the code." Gavin's voice was flat, scraped thin by days of bad motel sleep and bus station food, and whatever internal reckoning he had been conducting in the window seat between Las Vegas and New York. "I changed it myself before we left." The electronic keypad beeped. Once. Then the error tone, 3 short pulses, the small mechanical sound of a door declining to cooperate. "That's wrong," Marin said. Her voice had an edge to it that I had not heard from her before. Not the pampered impatience of a woman accustomed to getting what she wanted, but something rawer and more frightened underneath it. 6 days in a budget motel had apparently done something to the surface of her. "I know it's wrong," Gavin said, and I heard him try again, slower this time, with the deliberate care of a man who is telling himself he simply mistyped. 3 pulses. Error. "Gavin." Darlene's voice had dropped a register, the performance stripped out of it. "What is happening?" "I don't know." And for the first time I heard something in my son's voice that I had not heard since he was a boy, not since the year he was 12, and broke a window playing ball and stood in the kitchen doorway trying to explain it to me with that particular crack running through every syllable. Fear. Real fear, unmanaged and unpolished. The code should be working. I said it myself. I don't understand why it's not. The deadbolt on the interior side disengaged with a clean, solid click. The door swung inward. Ronan stood in the opening, all 6 feet 2 inches of him, hands loose at his sides, expression composed and entirely unreadable, looking at Gavin the way a man looks at something he has been expecting for a long time and is not particularly surprised to see. The silence that followed lasted perhaps 3 seconds. Then all 3 of them looked past Ronan into the living room. The apartment was warm, the lights were on. The west windows were full of the Manhattan skyline at night, the city doing what it always did, blazing and indifferent and magnificent. And in the center of the room, in the chair I had chosen, and the suit I had pressed, and with the tea I had been drinking for the past 3 hours going pleasantly cold on the table beside me, sat Preston Holbrook. 65 years old, fully recovered, very much alive. I watched their faces. Gavin went first, the color draining out of him so completely and so rapidly that for a moment I was genuinely concerned about his legs. His mouth opened. Nothing came out. His hands, still gripping the handle of a suitcase that had seen considerably better days, lost their grip, and the bag tipped sideways, and he didn't notice. Maren made a sound, not a word, not quite a gasp. Something between the two, the involuntary vocalization of a person whose nervous system has received information it was not prepared to process. Darlene's reaction was the one I found most instructive. Her face did not go pale. It went through a rapid, visible sequence shock, then calculation, then a desperate lunge for composure that did not quite make it in time. The face of a woman whose plan has just failed, and who is already, even in this first stunned second, looking for the next angle. There was no next angle. I had made sure of that. I reached forward, picked up my teacup, took a measured sip, and set it back down. "Welcome back," I said. My voice came out exactly as I had intended, warm enough to be civil, level enough to make clear that nothing in this room was going to proceed on their terms. "How was the trip?" Gavin's mouth worked again. His throat moved. He put one hand out against the doorframe to steady himself, and I watched his knuckles go white against the wood, and I felt the pain of it move through me the way it always did now, fast, acknowledged, and then set aside. "Dad." His voice came out barely above a whisper. You're here." "I've been here for 6 days," I said pleasantly. "Come in. You're letting the cold in." None of them moved. Behind them in the hallway, 2 of Ronan's men had appeared from the stairwell door, positioned unhurried present. Not threatening. Simply there. The way certain facts are simply there, waiting to be acknowledged. Maren's legs buckled slightly. She caught herself on Darlene's arm, and Darlene for once did not pull away, because Darlene's own legs were not entirely reliable at this particular moment either. Gavin looked at me across the length of the living room, across the 36 days, across the January night, across everything that had been said and done and decided and built in the space between, and his face finally stopped moving through its sequence of failed expressions and arrived at something simpler and more honest. He looked like a man who understood in his body and his bones that everything he had believed for the past 36 days was wrong. "Dad," he said again. And this time, there was nothing after it. Just the word hanging in the warm air of the apartment that was mine in the city, that had always been mine in the life that he had tried to take and failed. "Sit down, Gavin," I said quietly. "All of you. We have some things to discuss." They came in, Gavin first moving the way people move when their legs are working on instinct, because the thinking part of them has temporarily gone offline. Then Maren, one hand still on Darlene's arm, the expensive carry-on she had managed to keep, through everything trailing behind her on wheels that needed oiling. Then Darlene, who had recovered enough of herself by the time she crossed the threshold to lift her chin slightly, a reflex I suspected so deeply ingrained that not even this could fully suppress it. Ronan closed the door behind them with a quiet, definitive click. The 2 men from the hallway took up positions near the entrance. Not aggressive, not theatrical, simply present in the way that made clear the geometry of the room had been arranged deliberately and was not subject to renegotiation. I let them stand for a moment. Let them take in the apartment, the warmth, the light, the absolute ordinariness of a man sitting in his own living room drinking tea on a Tuesday evening. I wanted them to feel the full distance between what they had expected to find and what was actually here. because that distance was the point. That distance was 36 days of work. Then I stood. I am 65 years old, and I have spent most of those years in rooms where other people were taller, louder, and more immediately impressive than I was. I learned early that presence is not a function of size or volume. It is a function of certainty, of knowing exactly what you are and what you are doing and why. I stood up from that chair and the room changed, and everyone in it felt it change. "Gavin," I said, "sit down." He sat. The couch took his weight, the way couches take the weight of people who have stopped being able to hold themselves up entirely on their own. Maren sat beside him, pressing close in a way that might have been affection and was probably fear. Darlene chose the armchair to the left, the one farthest from me, I noticed, and perched on its edge with her handbag in her lap like a shield. I remained standing. On the evening of January 6th, I said, "You came into this room and threw every bottle on that vanity into the trash." I looked at Gavin steadily. "You turned off the heat. You closed the water valve. You took my phone. You changed the door code. And then you told me, and I want to be precise here because the words matter, you told me that by the time you got back, this place would be yours anyway." Gavin's jaw tightened. "Dad, I'm not finished." 2 words said quietly, and he stopped. "You then left for 36 days. Hawaii first, then Las Vegas. You left a 65-year-old man alone in a powerless apartment in January, with no medication, no water, no heat, and no way to call for help." I paused. "That is what happened. I want you to confirm it out loud before we go any further." The room was absolutely still. Gavin's eyes filled. Not the performative kind, not the crying of a man trying to generate sympathy, but the involuntary kind, the kind that happens when the body registers something the mind is still refusing to fully accept. His throat worked. His hands resting on his knees were trembling with a fine, persistent vibration that he was visibly trying and failing to control. "Yes," he said. The word came out broken at both ends. "Yes. That's what happened." Maren pressed the back of her hand to her mouth. Her shoulders shook once hard, and then she locked them still through what appeared to be considerable effort. Darlene said nothing. Her eyes were moving between me and Gavin and the 2 men by the door and the windows, and back to me with the rapid assessing quality of someone calculating exits. "There are no exits," I said, looking directly at her. "If that's what you're working out." Her eyes stopped moving. For the first time since I had known her, Darlene Kessler had nothing to say. I turned back to Gavin. "There's something I should have told you 6 months ago," I said. "I didn't because I wanted to understand something first. I understand it now." I crossed to the armchair across from the couch and sat not behind a desk, not at a distance, but close enough that he would have to look at me when I said what came next. My heart surgery was in July. Private clinic on the Upper East Side, Dr. Caldwell cash payment, no insurance record. The procedure was successful, complete. I have been fully recovered since August. The expression that crossed Gavin's face in the following 3 seconds was the most honest thing I had seen from him in years. Confusion first, the information not quite landing. Then the landing, the visible moment of comprehension, arriving like something physical, like a hand pressed flat against his chest. Then something that was not quite shame and not quite grief, but lived in the territory between them, in the place where a person goes when they realize the story they have been telling themselves has a different ending than the one they planned for. "The pills," he said. "Vitamin D and fish oil," I said. "Nothing more. You threw away supplements, Gavin." And then you flew to Hawaii to wait for a man who was never in any danger from anything except the cold you left him in. Marin made a sound that was unmistakably a sob, sharp and involuntary, quickly suppressed, but not quickly enough. She turned her face away, and I saw her shoulders shaking again, and this time she did not lock them still. Gavin put his face in his hands. Not dramatically, not as a performance. He just put his face in his hands the way a person does when the architecture of everything they have built around themselves has finally completely come down, and there is nothing left to do but feel the weight of it. I kept it from you, I said more quietly now, because I wanted to know what you would do when you thought I was vulnerable, when you thought the timeline was running in your favor. I let that sit for a moment. Now I know. Gavin's shoulders were shaking. A sound came out of him low and ragged and stripped of everything except its own rawness, and it was the hardest thing I had sat through in 36 days of hard things. Not because I doubted what I was doing, but because he was still my son, and some part of me would always feel that regardless of what he had done and what came next. I stood again, and my voice came back to its level register. Mitchell, I said. Mitchell Farrow stepped out of the hallway. He had been there since 6 o'clock, waiting with the patience of a man who bills by the hour and has no objection to waiting, and set the leather briefcase on the coffee table. There are some documents, I said, that I need you to look at. Mitchell opened the briefcase with the same unhurried precision he brought to everything, 2 latches left. Then right the lid lifting to reveal a stack of documents organized in the particular way that Mitchell organized things, which was to say perfectly, and without any wasted motion. He extracted the first folder and set it on the coffee table in front of Gavin. Gavin lifted his face from his hands. His eyes were red, the skin beneath them swollen, and there was a quality to his expression that I had not seen since he was a boy, caught in a serious mistake. Not the defiance that comes later, not the calculated damage control that comes after that, but the raw, pre-strategic look of someone who has not yet decided how to handle what is happening to them. He opened the folder. He read the first page, and I watched his face change the way a building changes when a critical support gives way, not all at once, but in a rapid, irreversible sequence, each element failing because the one before it has already gone. "This is a termination notice," he said. His voice was barely functional. "Effective as of February 7th, Mitchell said. Filed with the Secretary of State's office the same morning. As of that date, you are no longer the Chief Executive Officer of Halbrook Development Group. Your proxy authority has been revoked. Your signatory rights have been rescinded. Your access to all corporate accounts was suspended on January 7th. He said all of this in the tone of a man reading from a train schedule, factual, sequential, entirely without malice. If you attempt to represent the company or execute any document on its behalf going forward, you would be committing fraud under New York law." Gavin set the papers down on the coffee table. His hands were shaking badly enough now that the pages rattled against the glass. He pressed his palms flat to stop them the way you press a wound. "Dad." His voice cracked on the single syllable. "Dad, please. I know what I did was wrong. I know that. But you built this company for me. You always said it was mine. I built this company," I said, and my voice was very quiet and very clear, with 40 years of work. "I offered it to you. That is not the same thing as it being yours. You do not inherit something you tried to take by force." Gavin's chin dropped to his chest. Then Darlene leaned forward in the armchair, and her voice came out with the particular controlled urgency of a woman who has identified what she believes is still a viable angle. "Preston," she said, "I think there's been a tremendous misunderstanding here. Gavin has always cared deeply about you, we all have. Whatever happened on that night was a moment of very poor judgment under a great deal of pressure, and I take some responsibility for that, I do. But I want you to understand that no one in this family ever intended. Darlene. Gavin's head came up. His eyes had gone from broken to something harder, something with an edge that had been sharpened, I suspected, over 40 hours on a Greyhound bus with nothing to do but think. Stop talking. She blinked. Gavin, I'm trying to help. You told me to do it. His voice was low and precise and terrible in the way that things are terrible when they have been held in for a long time and finally come out without any performance attached. You told me to throw out his pills. You told me to cut the power. You told me 36 days and I come home to everything. He laughed, a short, broken sound with nothing funny in it. Your exact words, Darlene. I have them memorized. I've had nothing but time to memorize them. Darlene's composure cracked. Not completely, she was too practiced for that, but visibly in the way a windshield cracks when something hits it at exactly the right angle. A web of fractures spreading out from a single point. I was speaking hypothetically, she said. I was frustrated. I never meant for you to actually... You needed the money. Gavin's voice rose. The control was going, the exhaustion and humiliation of the past 6 days finally finding their outlet. You owe people in Las Vegas. You told me that. You told me it was urgent. You said if we could just get access to the estate, everything would be fine. Those were your words. Hypothetical. He spat the last word like something bitter. You put the idea in my head, and then you sat in a 5-star resort in Hawaii while I figured out the details. And now you're going to sit there and tell me you were speaking hypothetically. Marin, who had been very still and very quiet since she sat down, suddenly stood up. Stop it, she said. Her voice was shaking, but it had a core to it that surprised me, not the voice of the woman who had glided past my bedroom door without looking in on January 6th, but something rawer and less decorated. Both of you just stop. There are 2 men by the door, and we are sitting in Preston's apartment, and this... She pressed her hands against the sides of her head, fingers digging into her hair. This is not helping anything. Nothing you say to each other right now is going to help anything. The room went still. I let it be still for exactly as long as it needed to be. Then I spoke. What's in that briefcase, I said, is not a negotiation. It is a record of decisions I made over the past 36 days, each of which is final and legally executed. The company is no longer yours, Gavin. The accounts are no longer accessible to you. The will has been revised. I looked at each of them in turn, Gavin, Marin, Darlene, and let that land before I continued. What happens next is not something any of you have a vote on. But I want you to hear it from me directly in this room before you hear it from anyone else. I reached into the breast pocket of the navy suit and closed my fingers around the Nokia. There's one more thing I need to show you, I said. And then you'll understand the full picture. The Nokia 3310 was not an impressive object. It was small and black, and worn at the edges, the casing faded to a dull charcoal, in the places where hands had held it most often, over the course of 24 years. The screen was monochrome. The buttons were physical, slightly yellowed with age. It looked like something from a museum exhibit about the early history of mobile communication, or like something a person would find at the bottom of a junk drawer and consider throwing away. I held it in the center of my palm and looked at Gavin. I bought this phone in 2001, I said. I was working construction sites 12 hours a day. Couldn't afford to miss a call, couldn't afford much of anything, if I'm honest. I kept it in my jacket pocket because that's where it needed to be. I turned it over in my hand. I've carried it ever since, not because I needed it, because I never trusted that I wouldn't. Gavin was looking at the phone, the way a person looks at something they don't yet understand, but are beginning to be afraid of. Chatitom. On the evening of January 6th, I continued. When you first reached for those bottles on the vanity, my left hand was already under the mattress. This phone was where I had placed it 6 months ago, exactly where I needed it to be. I met his eyes. On the Nokia 3310, pressing and holding the number 1 key dials your carrier voicemail automatically. The line connected, the microphone transmitted, and the carrier's system recorded everything that was said in this room for the next 41 seconds, with a timestamp with your voice and with the full legal validity of a recording made by a party to the call. The color that had come back into Gavin's face over the past few minutes drained away again. Under New York Penal Law, Section 250, I said, a recording is legal when at least one party to the conversation has consented to it. I was that party. I initiated the connection. Everything this phone captured that night is admissible evidence. I paused. It has been in the possession of the Manhattan District Attorney's Office since January 8th. Darlene made a sound, not a word, just a sound low and involuntary, the kind that escapes before a person can stop it. I crossed to the Bluetooth speaker on the bookshelf. The good one, the one with the wide frequency response that Margaret had bought me for my birthday 3 years ago, because she said I listened to music like I was angry at it and deserved better sound, and connected the Nokia. The room was very quiet. I pressed play. Gavin's voice came out of the speaker with a clarity that seemed almost unfair. No static, no distortion, just the voice of a man speaking in a warm room to someone he believed could not stop him, rendered now in perfect fidelity for everyone present to hear. By the time we get back, this place will be mine anyway. Rest up, old man. The silence that followed lasted 4 seconds. Then Maren broke. Not quietly, there was nothing quiet about it. She pressed both hands over her mouth, but the sound came through anyway. A sob that started somewhere deep and came up fast and hard, and she bent forward at the waist the way people do when something hits them in the center and they can't stay upright against it. Her whole body was shaking. She pulled her hands away from her mouth long enough to say in a voice that sounded nothing like the woman who had glided past my bedroom door 36 days ago, Gavin. Oh God, Gavin. How could you? And then the words dissolved, and there was only the crying, ugly and uncontrolled, and completely real. Gavin did not look at her. He was looking at the speaker, at the Nokia, at the space between those two objects where his own voice had just hung in the air of his father's living room. His hands had stopped shaking. His whole body had gone very still in the particular way that bodies go still when the nervous system has received more than it can process and has simply paused. Then his eyes moved to me. And what I saw there, I want to be honest about this, because it would be easy to say I saw guilt or fear or the belated arrival of conscience. What I saw was something more complicated than any of those things. I saw a man who had made a catastrophic series of choices and had believed right up until 41 seconds ago that those choices were going to resolve in his favor. And now the resolution had arrived. And it was this, his father's voice, explaining the mechanism by which his own words had been preserved in a room his father was very much alive to occupy with the Manhattan District Attorney already in possession of the evidence. The resolution was not what he had planned. Darlene had gone the color of old plaster. She was gripping her handbag with both hands, the knuckles white and prominent, staring at the Nokia on the bookshelf, as if she could through force of will make it not exist. That recording, Mitchell said from his position near the hallway. his voice arriving into the silence with the measured weight of a man who has been waiting for exactly this moment. Along with the iMessage correspondence recovered from your company-issued computer, constitutes the evidentiary foundation for charges that the district attorney's office is preparing as of this week. Attempted murder in the second degree under New York Penal Law, Section 125.25. Criminal solicitation and conspiracy. He looked at Darlene. For both of you, Darlene's mouth opened. Nothing came out. For the second time in one evening, Darlene Kessler had nothing to say. I suspected it was a personal record. Gavin turned to me, and the last remaining architecture of his composure came down all at once. Not dramatically. Not with any performance attached, just the way things fall when they have been standing on nothing for too long. His eyes filled and spilled over tears running down a face that had gone past shame into something rawer and older, and his voice when it came out was the voice of someone much younger than the man who had walked into my bedroom 36 days ago in a suit that cost more than my first car. "Dad," he said, "I'm sorry. I am so." His voice broke completely. He pressed his fist against his mouth hard, and his shoulders heaved once, twice, 3 times, and when he lowered his hand, his face was wet and wrecked and entirely without defense. I don't know what happened to me. I don't know how I became someone who could... He stopped, started again. You built everything. You gave me everything, and I... He couldn't finish. I looked at my son. This man I had carried on my shoulders through Central Park. This man I had handed 40 years of work to this man who had stood in my bedroom and told me to rest up while he flew to Hawaii to wait for me to die. And I felt the full complexity of what it means to love someone who has done something unforgivable. It does not stop. That is the terrible thing about it. It does not stop. I know, I said quietly. I know you are. Then I straightened, and my voice returned to its level register, and I looked at Ronan. Make the call, I said. Before the NYPD arrived that evening, before Ronan opened the door, before the Nokia played its 41 seconds into the warm air of my living room, something else had already happened. I need to tell you about the afternoon first because the sequence of that day matters, and I want you to understand it completely. I arrived at Hallbrook Development Group at 2 o'clock in the afternoon on February 10th. I had not been inside this building in 36 days. The lobby was exactly as I remembered it. The 30-foot ceilings, the travertine floors, the wall of glass along the south face that I had specified in the original design 22 years ago, because I wanted a building that let the light in. I had designed this building. I had built it. I had worked in it every day for 2 decades. And for the past 3 years, I had been walking through it as a visitor, while my son occupied the corner office on the 24th floor. That ended today. The receptionist at the front desk, a young woman named Carol, who had been with the company for 4 years, and who had always struck me as someone who paid attention to more than her job description required, looked up when I came through the revolving door and went very still for a moment. Then she stood up, which she had never done when I came in as a visitor, and said, "Mr. Hallbrook, welcome back." 2 words. Welcome back. They hit me somewhere I hadn't expected. "Thank you, Carol," I said. "Is the building manager available?" "He's been expecting you," she said, and I could see in her face that she knew or had guessed or had heard enough in the past 36 days to have constructed a reasonably accurate picture that something significant was happening. The particular quality of alertness in this building had changed. I could feel it in the lobby the way you can feel a change in atmospheric pressure before a storm arrives. Mitchell was already upstairs in the conference room on the 22nd floor, with the building manager and the head of corporate security. I took the elevator up, shook hands with both men, and sat at the head of the table for the first time in 3 years. It felt, I will admit, exactly like what it was. I presented the termination documents, the board resolution, the proxy revocation, the Secretary of State filings, and the building manager reviewed them with the efficient brevity of a man who has been waiting for clear authorization and is relieved to finally have it. Corporate security was briefed. The front desk was notified. Gavin's building access card was deactivated at 2:47 p.m. By 2:47, Gavin's building access card had been deactivated. His name no longer existed in the system. The staff moved through the lobby with the particular alertness of people who know something significant has just shifted, even if they don't yet know exactly what. I had asked Mitchell to have the personal items from Gavin's office packed into a standard cardboard box and held at the front desk, ready for whenever he decided to show up to collect them. That was no longer my concern to manage. I had asked Mitchell to add one final element to the proceedings, something I had thought about carefully and decided was not cruelty, but clarity. I walked out of the elevator bank, then Nokia in hand, and crossed the lobby floor to the building manager's desk, where the house audio system controls were located. I had designed this building with quality speakers in every common area, because I had always believed that the spaces where people work should sound as good as they look. Today, that would serve a different purpose. I connected the Nokia to the system. The sound that came out of the lobby speakers was the same 41 seconds I had already played in the penthouse. But here in this space with these people, the staff who had worked for this company for years, some of them for longer than Gavin had been CEO, people who had given their professional lives to something I had built, it landed differently. Heavier. More public. More final. By the time we get back, this place will be mine anyway. Rest up, old man. Someone near the back of the lobby made a sound. I didn't look to see who. Gavin stood in the center of the travertine floor with his cardboard box and his crumpled travel clothes and the voice that had just come out of the speakers, and he did not move for a very long time. Then he picked up the box, walked to the revolving door, and pushed through it onto the street without looking back. I watched him go. Then I turned to Carol at the reception desk, who was pressing her lips together very firmly and blinking with unusual frequency, and I said, "I'll be in my office." "Yes, Mr. Halbrook," she said. "Welcome back." I was back at the penthouse by 6:30. The navy suit was still pressed. The tea was fresh. Ronan was standing by the window with his phone in his hand, and the particular stillness of a man who has made a call he cannot unmake and is waiting for its consequences to arrive. "They're on their way," he said. 20 minutes, maybe less." I nodded and sat back down in my chair. The room felt different now than it had 4 hours ago, when Gavin and Maureen and Darlene had been sitting across from me with the wreckage of their plans scattered on the coffee table between us. The air had changed, lighter somehow, the way air changes after a storm has passed through and taken the pressure with it. Mitchell was in the corner with his legal pad. The two men from the hallway had come back inside. Everyone was waiting. Gavin was on the couch, elbows on his knees, head down, staring at the floor between his feet, with the concentrated attention of a man trying to hold himself together through sheer focus. The cardboard box from his office sat beside him. Ronan had retrieved it from the front desk and brought it here, one more thing that no longer had a place to belong. Gavin had come back to the penthouse the same way he always had, as if habit alone could hold his life together. I had told Ronan to let him in. I wanted him in this room when the NYPD arrived. I wanted him to have nowhere left to go. Maren sat beside him. She was not touching him. She was looking at her hands, which were folded in her lap, with the careful precision of a person who has decided that keeping her hands still is the only thing she can control right now. Darlene was in the armchair. She had aged visibly in the past 2 hours, not in the dramatic way of stories, but in the real way, the way people age when a great deal of sustained stress leaves its mark on the surface of a face all at once. She was looking at the middle distance with the flat, exhausted expression of a woman who has run out of angles. The knock came at 7:12. 3 firm raps. The particular cadence of official authority, not aggressive, not tentative, just the knock of people who are accustomed to doors being opened for them. Ronan crossed to the entrance and opened it. The detective was a compact man in his late 40s, dark suit. No tie, with the kind of face that had been trained over many years to reveal very little about what was happening behind it. Behind him stood 2 uniformed officers, positioned with the practiced patience of people who do this regularly and have learned that patience is usually more effective than urgency. "Mr. Halbrook," the detective said, looking past Ronan at me. "Detective Reyes, Manhattan North Homicide. I understand you have evidence to present in conjunction with a complaint filed with the district attorney's office." "I do," I said. Mitchell stepped forward and handed the detective a folder, a copy of the evidence package that had been with the DA's office since January 8th. The voicemail recording preserved by the digital forensics firm. The iMessage correspondence certified as recovered from a company-owned device. The medical report documenting my condition when Ronan's team found me on the night of January 6th. The timeline prepared by Mitchell correlating each piece of evidence to a specific date and action. Detective Reyes took the folder and read the first page with the focused efficiency of someone who reads under time pressure regularly. Then he looked up. "Gavin Halbrook," he said, turning to where Gavin sat on the couch. Gavin looked up. His eyes were dry now. He had moved past the crying into the territory beyond it, the place where there are no more tears because the body has exhausted its supply, and what remains is just the bare fact of what has happened. "I need you to stand up, sir." Gavin stood. Slowly, with the careful movements of a man whose legs are not entirely reliable, he got to his feet and faced the detective. "You are being placed under arrest for attempted murder in the second degree pursuant to New York Penal Law, Section 125.25. Detective Reyes's voice was even unhurried, each word given exactly the weight it required. "You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. You have the right to an attorney. If you cannot afford an attorney, one will be appointed for you." The handcuffs made a sound when they closed, a small, precise mechanical click that seemed in the quiet of the living room to be very loud. Marin made a sound that was not quite a word and not quite a scream, something between the two wrenched out of her involuntarily, her hands flying up from her lap to cover her mouth as her eyes filled and spilled over in a single rapid motion. She reached toward Gavin and then stopped herself. Her arm extended halfway, fingers open, not quite touching. Gavin did not look at her. He was looking at me. Across the living room, across the 36 days, and across everything, he was looking at me with the face of a man who has arrived at the end of something and has run out of words to put around it. His jaw was tight. His eyes were wet. He opened his mouth, once closed it, and then said very quietly to me and to no one else, "I'm sorry, Dad." I held his gaze. "I know," I said. Detective Reyes then turned to the armchair where Darlene sat. Darlene Kessler. She looked up at him with the eyes of a woman who had known somewhere beneath all the calculation and the angles that this moment was coming. Had known it, perhaps, from the moment she sent that first message, had known it the way you know things you choose not to look at directly. "You are being placed under arrest for criminal solicitation in the first degree and conspiracy in the second degree pursuant to New York Penal Law, Sections 100 and 105. He paused. Stand up, please. She stood, and for a moment, just a moment, something crossed her face that was not defiance and not calculation, and not the performative suffering she had deployed so effectively over the years. Something genuine, something that looked in the brief second before her composure reasserted itself, like the face of a woman who understood finally and completely what she had done. Then the handcuffs closed, and the moment passed. Maren was crying openly now, both hands pressed over her face, shoulders shaking with the kind of crying that doesn't care about being observed. I looked at her, this woman who had walked past my bedroom door 36 days ago without a backward glance, and I felt no anger toward her. Only the particular, complicated sadness of a situation that had destroyed more people than its architects had intended. "Maren," I said. She looked up, eyes red, face wet. "So you're not under arrest," I said. "There was no evidence of your direct involvement in the planning. That doesn't mean there are no consequences. There will be in other forms. But tonight, you're free to go." She stared at me for a long moment. Then she nodded once and pressed her hands flat against her thighs and stood up with the careful dignity of someone who has very little left and is determined to hold on to what remains. Gavin and Darlene were escorted to the door. At the threshold, Gavin paused. One of the officers waited with professional patience and looked back at me one final time. There were no more words. There was nothing left to say that hadn't already been said or recorded or filed or decided. He walked out. The door closed. Ronan let out a breath beside me, slow and controlled, but a breath nonetheless, the release of something that had been held for a long time. "That's it," he said, quietly, almost to himself. I looked at the empty room, the indentations in the couch cushions where they had been sitting, the cardboard box Gavin had left behind the teacup on the glass table that had stayed with me through the whole of this long and exhausting day. "Not quite," I said. "There's still a courtroom. 8 months is a long time, and not long enough. The New York State Supreme Court building on Center Street is one of those structures that was designed to make a person feel the weight of what happens inside it. The Corinthian columns, the broad stone steps, the bronze doors that open onto corridors where the ceilings are high enough to make sound behave differently than it does in ordinary rooms. I had walked past this building hundreds of times over the course of my career. I had never had occasion to walk into it on my own behalf. October 14th, a Tuesday. The kind of clear, cold fall day that Manhattan does better than anywhere else. The light sharp and clean, the sky, an almost aggressive blue. The air carrying the particular energy of a city that has transitioned from summer without any nostalgia for it. I wore the navy suit. The courtroom on the 6th floor was smaller than I had imagined, which is often the way with places that carry significant weight. The actual space turns out to be more human-scaled than the idea of it. The gallery was half full. Reporters occupied the back rows. Mitchell sat beside me at the table to the left of the center aisle, his legal pad open, his pen uncapped, entirely in his element. Across the aisle at the defense table, Gavin sat beside a lawyer I didn't recognize, a careful-looking man in his 50s, who had the composed expression of someone who has reviewed the evidence against his client and has calibrated his expectations accordingly. Gavin was wearing a suit I had not seen before. Dark gray, properly fitted, someone's attempt to restore the appearance of the man he had been. But 8 months in the system, 8 months of hearings and depositions and the grinding procedural machinery of a serious criminal case had done something to him that the suit could not entirely conceal. He was thinner. The angles of his face were more pronounced. He sat with his back straight and his hands folded on the table and his eyes on the front wall, and he looked like a man who had made a very long journey from somewhere and was very tired. Darlene sat at a separate defense table with her own attorney. She did not look at Gavin. She had not, according to Mitchell's contacts in the DA's office, looked at Gavin voluntarily in any of the preceding hearings. Whatever alliance had existed between them had been thoroughly dissolved by the experience of being arrested in the same room and charged on the same evidence. The judge entered at 9:03, a woman in her early 60s named Judge Patricia Callahan, with the bearing of someone who has presided over serious matters for a long time and has developed a patience for the pace of justice that most people never achieve. She took her seat, reviewed the docket, and looked out at the assembled parties with the calm authority of a person who is entirely comfortable with the weight of her position. People versus Holbrook and Kessler, she said. Are both parties ready to proceed? Both parties were ready. The assistant district attorney was a woman named Torres, 30s, precise, with the particular energy of a prosecutor who believes in her case and has prepared for it accordingly. She laid out the evidence in the order I recognized from Mitchell's briefings, the voicemail recording first played through the courtroom's audio system with a clarity that made several people in the gallery visibly flinch. Then the iMessage correspondence displayed on the courtroom monitors, line by line. Then the medical report from the night of January 6th, documenting hypothermia and the clinical assessment of a 65-year-old man left alone without heat water or access to help in winter conditions. Ada Torres was methodical and relentless in the particular way of people who know their evidence is good and trust it to speak for itself. When it was time for my testimony, I walked to the stand and sat and looked out at the courtroom and took a breath that I tried to keep from showing because the habit of not showing things in rooms full of people had been with me for 40 years, and I saw no reason to abandon it now. The ADA asked me to describe the events of January 6th. I described them. I spoke for 37 minutes. I described the morning and the afternoon, and Gavin's face when he turned from the vanity with the bottles in his hand, and the sound the plastic made when it hit the metal bin, and the darkness and the cold, and the Nokia screen lighting up in my palm. I described calling Ronan and the 41 seconds on the voicemail and the decision not to call 911 because I wanted more than a rescue. I described what I had built over 40 years and what I had given my son and what I had found when I looked at the evidence on Mitchell's tablet on day 2. I spoke in the same level-controlled register I had maintained throughout. Not because I was not feeling things, but because the feelings were not the point. The facts were the point. The facts were sufficient. When Gavin's defense attorney cross-examined me, he asked whether I had in fact been in danger, given that my medical condition had been resolved prior to January 6th. I looked at him with the patience of a man who has anticipated this question. The danger, I said, was not only medical. A 65-year-old man was left alone without heat, without water, without any means of communication, with the deliberate intention that he would not survive the experience. Whether the specific mechanism of death was medication or cold or dehydration is a detail. The intention was not a detail. The defense attorney sat down. I returned to my seat beside Mitchell, and Mitchell did not say anything, but he moved his legal pad approximately 2 inches to the right, which was as close as he ever came to a gesture of solidarity. The defense presented its case over the following 2 days. Gavin's attorney argued diminished capacity under undue influence, that Darlene's pressure had compromised his judgment. Darlene's attorney argued that her text messages constituted frustrated venting rather than criminal solicitation. Both arguments were constructed carefully and delivered competently and landed in my assessment with the weight of arguments made against very good evidence. On the 3rd day, the jury retired. They were back in 4 hours and 20 minutes. I sat in the gallery with Ronan on one side and Mitchell on the other and watched the jury file back in, and I thought about Margaret, who would have had something precise and right to say about this moment and about the building on the west side that was apparently being considered for a historic preservation designation, and about a phone call I had made from beneath a mattress on a January night 8 months ago that had lasted 41 seconds and changed everything. The forewoman stood. On the charge of attempted murder in the second degree, she said, "We, the jury, find the defendant, Gavin Holbrook, guilty." Gavin closed his eyes. On the charge of criminal solicitation in the first degree and conspiracy in the second degree, she continued, turning slightly toward the second defense table. "We, the jury, find the defendant, Darlene Kessler, guilty." Darlene put her hand flat on the table in front of her, just her hand pressed flat against wood, as if she needed to confirm that the surface was still solid. Then she removed it and folded both hands in her lap and looked straight ahead at nothing in particular, with the expression of a woman absorbing the full cost of a calculation that had not worked out. Judge Callahan thanked the jury and set the sentencing hearing for 3 weeks hence. I walked out of the courtroom into the Center Street afternoon, with Ronan beside me and Mitchell a step behind, and the October sun hit my face with a warmth that seemed, after the recycled air and fluorescent light of the past 3 days, almost unreasonably generous. 3 weeks, Ronan said. 3 weeks, I agreed. We walked down the broad stone steps together, and I put my hands in my pockets, and I thought about what it would mean to finally be finished with this, and discovered with some surprise that I was not yet sure. The sentencing hearing was on a Thursday in early November. The trees on Center Street had gone gold and orange in the 3 weeks since the verdict, and the wind coming off the Hudson had acquired the particular edge that means winter is not a threat anymore, but a promise. I arrived at the courthouse at 8:45, 20 minutes before the doors opened, and stood on the broad stone steps and looked up at the columns and thought about nothing in particular, which was something I had gotten considerably better at over the past 10 months. Ronan stood beside me. He was wearing a dark overcoat and a scarf that Margaret would have approved of, and he was drinking coffee from a paper cup and looking at the street with the unhurried attention of a man who has nowhere else he needs to be. "How are you feeling?" he asked. "Ask me in an hour," I said. He nodded and drank his coffee, and we stood there together on the steps until the doors opened, and then we went inside. The courtroom had a different quality than it had during the trial. Less charged, the air not quite so tight, the gallery smaller and quieter. The reporters were still there, but fewer of them. The procedural machinery of sentencing moves differently than the machinery of verdict, more deliberate, more final, with the particular gravity of a room in which the remaining questions are being answered one by one. Maren was in the gallery when I came in. She was sitting 3 rows back on the aisle, wearing a dark coat and no jewelry, her hair pulled back simply. She looked like someone who had shed several layers of something over the past 10 months. Not just the expensive clothes and the careful grooming, but whatever had been underneath those things that needed the expensive clothes to prop it up. She looked smaller than I remembered. She also looked more real. She saw me come in. We did not speak. But she held my gaze for a moment, and there was something in her face that was not an apology. An apology would have been too easy, would have required something from me in return, but was an acknowledgement of what had happened, of her own proximity to it, of the difference paper thin and morally vast between what she had not done and what she had not stopped. I nodded at her once and took my seat beside Mitchell. Gavin was brought in at 9:05. The orange jumpsuit had replaced the dark gray suit, and there was no amount of tailoring that was going to solve that problem. He walked in with the particular gait of someone who has spent 10 months learning to move through controlled spaces, measured, contained, the natural swagger entirely gone. He sat at the defense table and folded his hands and looked at them. Darlene came in separately. She sat at her own table and looked at the front wall and did not turn around. Judge Callahan entered at 9:15, took her seat, reviewed the pre-sentencing reports, with the thoroughness of a woman who does not treat these documents as formalities, and then looked up at the room. "Before I impose sentence," she said, "I want to address both defendants directly." She looked at Gavin first. "Mr. Holbrook, the pre-sentencing report documents a man who by every external measure had been given extraordinary advantages in his life. Education opportunity, a position of significant authority entrusted to him by the very person he sought to harm." She paused, and in the pause the courtroom was very still. This court takes seriously the breach of trust involved when a person abuses the care of an elderly or vulnerable family member. The evidence in this case in particular, the recorded statement made on the night of January 6th, establishes not merely an act of poor judgment, but a deliberate, premeditated attempt to deprive your father of his life for financial gain. The court finds no mitigating factor sufficient to reduce the severity of that conduct. Gavin was looking at the surface of the defense table. His jaw was tight. A muscle moved in his cheek once, and then was still. Judge Callahan looked at Darlene. "Ms. Kessler, the evidence establishes that you initiated and sustained the criminal plan in this case." The text messages recovered from the defendant Holbrook's company-issued device show clearly that the idea originated with you was communicated to a family member with the explicit intention that he act on it and was motivated by personal financial desperation. She let that sit for a moment. Solicitation of this nature, encouraging another person to commit a serious felony against a vulnerable individual, is not a victimless act. It is not frustrated venting. It is a crime, and this court treats it accordingly. Darlene's hands were folded in her lap. Her face showed nothing. She had, I suspected, made some internal decision in the weeks since the verdict about how she was going to sit in this chair on this day, and she was executing that decision with the grim discipline of a woman who had very few resources left and was conserving what remained. Judge Callahan looked back at her notes. "Gavin Holbrook on the charge of attempted murder in the second degree. This court sentences you to 10 years in the custody of the New York State Department of Corrections, to be served at Sing Sing Correctional Facility in Ossining, New York." The gavel came down. Gavin closed his eyes. His hands, still folded on the table, tightened against each other until the knuckles went white, and then slowly, deliberately, he released them. He opened his eyes and looked up at the ceiling for a long moment. Then he looked at me. I did not look away. "Certain. Darlene Kessler on the charges of criminal solicitation in the first degree and conspiracy in the second degree. This court sentences you to 3 years in the custody of the New York State Department of Corrections." The second gavel. Darlene did not close her eyes. She absorbed the sentence the way she absorbed most things, by not reacting, by making her face into something that revealed as little as possible. But her hands in her lap twisted once against each other, and I saw it, and I think she knew I saw it, and neither of us said anything about it. The correctional officers moved to Gavin's table. He stood slowly with the care of a man who wants to do this one last thing with some dignity, and he looked at me one final time across the length of the courtroom. His eyes were wet, but his face was still. He opened his mouth, and I could see him searching for something, for words that were adequate to the moment, for some final thing that would mean enough to be worth saying. He found nothing. Or perhaps he found that there was nothing sufficient and chose honesty over adequacy. He nodded at me once, and then he turned and walked with the officers through the side door, and the door closed behind him, and he was gone. Maren made a sound behind me, quiet, swallowed almost immediately, but there. I did not turn around, because I did not think she wanted me to. Outside on the Center Street steps, The November light was the kind of low, golden, slightly melancholy light that this city does in the fall. The light that makes everything look like it is in the process of becoming something else. Ronan was beside me. Mitchell had said his goodbyes inside with a handshake and a look that conveyed more than he would ever put into words, and had gone back to his office because Mitchell always went back to his office. Ronan and I stood on the steps and looked at the street. 10 years, he said. 10 years, I said. We stood there for a little while longer. A cab went by. Two people walked past arguing about something with the cheerful intensity of people who are not actually angry. A pigeon landed on the step below us, regarded us with the philosophical indifference of New York pigeons, and flew away. I reached into the breast pocket of the navy suit. The Nokia 3310 fit in my palm the way it always had, small, solid, worn at the edges. I looked at it for a long time. This phone that I had carried for 24 years. This phone that had been beneath a mattress on a January night and had done the one thing I needed it to do with the 41 seconds it had. I thought about the building on Delancey Street and the payphone outside the developer's office in 81 and Margaret buying the bone china in London, and the first time Gavin had called me Dad. He was 18 months old, and he said it in the kitchen of the apartment on West End Avenue. And I had stood there with a dish towel in my hand, feeling like the ground had become solid beneath my feet for the first time. Then I placed the Nokia carefully into the breast pocket of the navy suit, the left side over the heart, and pressed my hand flat against it for a moment. "Ready?" Ronan said. "Getting there," I said. We walked down the steps together. Behind us, the courthouse stood as it always had. Columns, bronze doors, the weight of what happened inside it, carried in the stone of its face. Ahead of us, Manhattan spread out in all directions, and the company was there, and the work was there, and whatever years I had left to do it right were there waiting. I had spent 40 years building things meant to outlast me. It turned out the most important thing I ever built was something no one could see: 41 seconds of a man's voice preserved in the memory of a phone that had been waiting under a mattress for the moment it was needed. I put my hands in my pockets and walked into the November afternoon. The city, as always, went on. I have told you everything now. 36 days, one old phone. 41 seconds that changed everything. I won't pretend I played no part in this. I handed power to someone who hadn't earned it. I saw the signs and looked away. Don't do what I did. Don't confuse love with blind trust. Don't wait for the worst moment to ask the hardest questions, because by then the cost is already too high. I was raised to believe that God watches what men choose to ignore. Standing on those courthouse steps, I believed it again. Family justice is real, not as revenge, but as accountability. The revenge stories family members carry inside them always end the same way. The truth surfaces, and everything built on greed collapses under its own weight. True family justice is quiet, slow, and permanent. My personal belief is this: no amount of money, no inheritance, no shortcut is worth the destruction of your own conscience. The revenge stories family members tell themselves to justify cruelty are always borrowed time. And borrowed time always comes due. If this story stayed with you, leave a comment, share it with someone who needs it, and subscribe. Because the next story carries its own weight, and it's worth hearing. Thank you for staying until the very end. The stories ahead contain fictional elements crafted to illuminate something true. If that's not for you, choose what serves you best. But if you're staying, there's more to come.